It was the first day of the term at Mwisho wa Barabara Secondary School, and excitement buzzed in the air like a subtle hum. The school, tucked away in a remote Kenyan village, seemed alive with the laughter of students reunited after the break, their voices echoing off the weathered walls. Among the crowd was Esther, a bright Form 2 student. Though shy, she had an undeniable presence. Her dark skin gleamed in the soft morning light filtering through the classroom window, and her neatly arranged books seemed to mirror the precision in her demeanor. She waited in quiet anticipation for the new English teacher, Mr. Kamau, whom everyone had been murmuring about with curiosity. Mr. Kamau, fresh out of teacher's college, strode into the classroom, his heart racing with nervous energy. The rural village school was nothing like the urban environment he was used to, and he felt like a stranger in this world of endless fields and mud paths. As he introduced himself, his voice faltered slightly, and he quickly scanned the room. His gaze brushed over the sea of faces until it landed on Esther, who sat at the center of the classroom like an anchor in a storm. For a moment, time seemed to slow. Esther's deep, expressive eyes met his, and Mr. Kamau forgot where he was. She was unlike anyone he had ever seen. There was something magnetic about her, something that stirred a feeling he couldn't place. Esther, too, felt the intensity of the moment. Her cheeks flushed, and she quickly averted her gaze, but the brief connection lingered in the air between them, fragile and electric. From that day on, Mr. Kamau found it hard to keep his mind from drifting toward Esther during his lessons. Her quiet focus and the subtle grace with which she carried herself fascinated him. She wasn't like the other students, and each time he caught her eye, he felt a strange pull. What started as admiration for her intelligence soon morphed into something more, something dangerous. For Esther, Mr. Kamau was more than just a teacher. His lessons lit up her world, and she found herself hanging on to every word he said. His voice, smooth and confident, ignited something within her, a flame she couldn't extinguish. The admiration she felt soon grew into a deeper, more complicated emotion that she didn't fully understand, but one that tugged at her heart each time their eyes met across the classroom. One afternoon, while the other students chattered and played during lunch break, Esther sat alone under the shade of a large acacia tree. She was lost in the world of Things Fall Apart, her favorite novel. As she flipped through its pages, the words on the paper became blurry, her mind wandering to Mr. Kamau's lessons. She barely noticed when he approached, his steps careful and measured. "What are you reading?" Mr. Kamau asked, his voice soft but warm. Esther looked up, startled. She hadn't expected to see him outside the classroom, and her heart skipped a beat. She held up the book, showing him the cover. "Things Fall Apart," she said quietly. "Ah," Mr. Kamau smiled. "A great choice. What do you think of it so far?" "It's sad," Esther admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "How everything falls apart so quickly. Okonkwo loses everything and it all feels inevitable." Mr. Kamau nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Life can be like that sometimes. Things change when we least expect it." Their eyes locked again, and this time the tension between them was palpable. It hung in the air like a secret waiting to be discovered. Neither of them spoke for a moment, both aware of the unspoken connection growing between them. The next few days were filled with stolen glances and fleeting moments that neither of them could ignore. Mr. Kamau found it increasingly difficult to focus on his lessons, and every time he looked up from the chalkboard, his eyes instinctively sought out Esther. She, too, seemed distracted, her thoughts constantly drifting to him. The other students began to notice the subtle exchanges, the way Mr. Kamau's gaze lingered just a little too long, and how Esther's attention always seemed to be on him. Whispers started to ripple through the classroom, soft but insistent. "Have you noticed how Mr. Kamau always looks at Esther?" one girl whispered to her friend. "Yeah," the other girl replied, her voice tinged with suspicion. "There's definitely something going on." By the end of the week, the rumors had spread like wildfire. Everyone in Form 2 had noticed the lingering looks, the small, stolen smiles, and the moments that felt too personal for a teacher and a student. Esther tried to block out the gossip, but it gnawed at her, making her feel uneasy. After school one day, she lingered by the gate, waiting for Mr. Kamau. Her heart pounded as she saw him approach, a mixture of fear and longing swirling in her chest. "Sir?" she called softly, glancing around to make sure no one was watching. Mr. Kamau slowed his steps, his eyes scanning the surroundings before he stepped closer. His voice was low, cautious. "Esther, is something wrong? The students are talking about us," she whispered, her voice barely audible. They think there's something between us." Mr. Kamau's face darkened with concern. "We haven't done anything wrong," he said, his voice firm but quiet. "I know," Esther replied, her voice trembling. "But it doesn't matter. They've noticed. What if the teachers hear about it?" He hesitated, the weight of her words sinking in. He knew she was right. Their connection, though never acted upon, had become too obvious to ignore. But the feelings he had for her, feelings he had been trying to suppress, were real. And he could tell that she felt the same. "We just need to be careful," he finally said, his voice gentle but resolute. "I care about you, Esther, but we can't let anyone know." Esther's heart soared at his words, even though she knew the danger they were courting. Being near him made her feel alive in a way she had never experienced before. But as the days went on, the weight of their secret grew heavier. In the staff room, the teachers had begun to take notice as well. Mrs. Kamene, the sharp-eyed deputy head teacher, was the first to voice her concerns. "Have you seen how that young intern interacts with Esther?" she asked Mr. Otieno, a senior teacher, as they sat sipping their afternoon tea. Mr. Otieno nodded. "Yes, I've noticed. It's becoming obvious, isn't it?" Mrs. Kamene frowned, her brow furrowing. "We can't let this continue. The school has a reputation to uphold. I'll be keeping a closer eye on them." As the weeks passed, the tension between Mr. Kamau and Esther became unbearable. Their secret was too big to hide, and soon it would all come crashing down. But for now, in the fleeting moments they shared between lessons, in the quiet glances and whispered conversations, they held on to the fragile connection that made them feel alive, unaware of how quickly it would unravel.